What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alrighty, so it is time to start Leviticus, which is one of those books of the Bible that gets way overlooked, generally speaking. Probably in large part because a lot of people find it boring. I can't necessarily, fault people too hard for that. But also, you shouldn't ignore parts of the Bible just because you don't find them interesting. Anyway. Okay, so real quick spark notes of everything in the Bible so far, I guess. World was created. People sinned and messed up. Adam and Eve, after a few generations, the world ends up becoming really bad. And God hits the reset button, saves Noah and his family because they're still good, but washes everything else away in a flood. And then further generations down the line, God makes a covenant with Abraham, saying that, he will be the father of many nations, and that basically God's plan for the world and for the, completion of the world in a sense, or at least for, making the world, turning it into its eventual final ideal state, was going to flow through Abraham's descendants. So, a couple generations later, we get to Joseph being in Egypt and being able to prepare for a famine that then strikes a bunch of the surrounding area. So because of that, his father, Jacob, and the rest of Jacob's sons wind up moving to Egypt with Joseph. But then, their family grows in number there to the point where it kind of threatens Pharaoh, or seems to threaten Pharaoh. So Pharaoh starts punishing them and treating them harshly. God sends Moses to deliver the people from Egypt and their slavery there. And then once they make it out, God gives them a bunch of commandments and basically establishes, okay, here's how I want you all to live, so that you will be set apart as my people. But they've just gotten done with, getting a bunch of these laws, getting them written down, and setting up the established place to, have the priests go to God, seek God's will, represent the people for God, and, kind of do, in a sense, what Moses has somewhat been doing to this point, where Moses would hear something from God and then tell the people, and vice versa, like the other direction too, from the people to God. But anyway, so we finished off Exodus with the tabernacle being set up and completed, and it just said that as they went along their journeys, the cloud that signified God's presence would pretty much guide them where to go. And if it stayed on the tabernacle, it would stay. If it left the tabernacle, they would go. But anyway, so that's where we pick up Leviticus here. Starting, well, obviously, with chapter 1. So, here we go. The Lord called Moses from the tabernacle and said to him, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. When you present an animal as an offering to the Lord, you may take it from your herd of cattle or your flock of sheep and goats." Footnote at Tabernacle just says tent of meeting. That's just to let you know what the Hebrew technically says word for word. But, okay, so I guess this, at the very least, clarifies that, when you're presenting an animal, you're not supposed to just take some wild animal and present that as an offering, because then you're not giving anything of yours to God. Also, don't give your neighbor stuff, because that's not you giving anything of yours to God either. So, yeah, anyway, not too much else to say there, but just disclaimer, more rules and regulations incoming. In fact, that's a lot of really Leviticus through Deuteronomy, I think, or something to that effect. A lot of things that people find boring, which is why those often get skipped over when, going through the general story of the Bible and kind of hitting like the Spark Notes version. A lot of people will skip past Exodus. Heck, even, once Exodus gets to them leaving Egypt, a lot of people will just skip right to Joshua. So anyway, all that to say, disclaimer, laws and things incoming. So, verse 3, here we go. If the animal you present as a burnt offering is from the herd, it must be a male with no defects. Bring it to the entrance of the tabernacle, so you may be accepted by the Lord. Lay your hand on the animal's head, and the Lord will accept its death in your place to purify you, making you right with him. Then slaughter the young bull in the Lord's presence, and Aaron's sons, the priests, will present the animal's blood by splattering it against all sides of the altar that stands at the entrance to the tabernacle. Then skin the animal and cut it into pieces. The sons of Aaron the priest will build a wood fire on the altar. They will arrange the pieces of the offering, including the head and fat, on the wood burning on the altar. But the internal organs and the legs must first be washed with water. Then the priest will burn the entire sacrifice on the altar as a burnt offering. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. So, obviously, not every sacrifice that they presented to the Lord was necessarily, of cattle. But the ones that were supposed to be done in this way. Footnote here, the original Hebrew could possibly mean it, meaning the offering would be accepted by the Lord. It's kind of sort of semantics in a little bit, but using the word "you" here almost makes it seem more like a reference back to like even Genesis, where you had Cain and Abel giving their offerings to God, and one offering was accepted and the other was not, and in a sense, Cain and Abel themselves were or were not accepted based on their offerings. So anyway, again, kind of sort of semantics saying you or it there, but it when worded like this, it can be a bit more symbolic of, past events. Footnote over here, making you right with him could be to make atonement for you. And I find it interesting that it says they have to lay their hand on the animal's head specifically. Like, if they put their hand on any other part of the animal, that it wouldn't count, basically. I'm not 100% sure whether that's supposed to be, symbolic of, having your thoughts or whatever, like, kind of go into the animal, again, symbolically, or if it was just a practical kind of like, hey, your hand should be on the animal's head, helping to keep it under control, because also B, they're gonna be, the animal is gonna be killed, and if you don't hold its head up, it's gonna make it more difficult to, because often the way they wound up killing the animals for these kinds of offerings was to, cut their necks. So obviously if they had their hand elsewhere, it would kind of make that process more difficult. So it could be, really it could be both practical and symbolic in a way. But anyway, and then it just got into more detail about the specific parts of the animal and how they were to be prepared for the offering and whatnot. Then we get to verse 10. If the animal you present as a burnt offering is from the flock, it may be either a sheep or a goat, but it must be a male with no defects. Slaughter the animal on the north side of the altar in the Lord's presence, and Aaron's sons, the priests, will splatter its blood against all sides of the altar. Then cut the animal in pieces, and the priests will arrange the pieces of the offering, including the head and fat, on the wood burning on the altar. But the internal organs and the legs must first be washed with water. Then the priest will burn the entire sacrifice on the altar as a burnt offering. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. So, very similar process for the offerings with sheep and goats. Really, I guess this was to specify that, yes, it's a similar process. But also B, that, you could offer a sheep or goat. It didn't have to specifically be just one of those options, but it still had to be male with no defects. And this one said specifically, that the animal has to be killed on the north side of the altar. I'm not quite sure why specifically that, but it's one of those things where it just kind of is what it is. Maybe the north side would have had more of a direct line with the tabernacle. And so, because it mentions in the Lord's presence. It's maybe, I don't know if that's I mean, obviously it was at least somewhat important for it to be specified like that, but I'm not sure what exactly the importance was of doing that on the north side of the altar specifically. But anyway, moving on, I guess, to verse 14. If you present a bird as a burnt offering to the Lord, choose either a turtle dove or a young pigeon. The priest will take the bird to the altar, wring off its head, and burn it on the altar. But first you must drain its blood against the side of the altar. The priest must also remove the crop and the feathers, and throw them in the ashes on the east side of the altar. Then, grasping the bird by its wings, the priest will tear the bird open, but without tearing it apart. Then he will burn it as a burnt offering on the wood burning on the altar. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. This says, or with crop and its contents, meaning the Hebrew is uncertain. Okay, I'm not familiar enough exactly with birds to know what exactly it's referring to when it says the crop of the bird. Was that like the tail end of it, I guess, maybe? Because it's clearly not the wings. So that makes the most sense to me. But yeah. So with birds obviously being significantly smaller than sheep, goats, or bulls, obviously the process is a little bit different, but still kind of is like, okay, kill it quick, and then, pull different bits of it apart to then prepare it for being placed on the altar. So yeah, that I guess about does it for Leviticus chapter 1. So I guess since we previously in Exodus just kind of had the, making of the tabernacle, now it's getting into the offerings and some other things like that would happen at the tabernacle, or at least in the general area thereof. I don't know for sure. I didn't look closely at chapter 2 to see if that's actually where it's going to continue from there, but it makes sense. It's still related to the tabernacle, so it makes sense that that's where it would kind of carry on from there. All right, so Leviticus chapter 1 is done. If you thought we were done getting laws from God, guess again. Now we're getting into stuff about how the offerings should be done. So, yeah, I'm not exactly sure how much more there is left to go, but there's probably still quite a bit of rules to cover. Anyway, okay, that's going to do it for now. As always, like the video if you enjoyed it, share it with others if you want them to see. Make sure you subscribe to my channel to see more of my videos. Click the bell to get updates when I post new ones. Look down in the description for other social media information and stuff like that. And, of course, leave comments down below that with any thoughts you have, whether it's related to this chapter, other Bible stuff, other video ideas, whatever you have for me. Let me know down below. So that's it. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next chapter. But until then, stay cool, people.